Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to the show. It's your host, Danny Dhaiphong. As you can see, I am joined by former CIA analyst Larry Johnson and former Chief of Staff for Colin Powell, both great geopolitical analysts. We have Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson. Gentlemen, thanks so much for coming on today.
Thank you.
Right. So we have an escalating situation I wanted to get to. U.S.-Russia tensions are going nuclear in many respects. And I wanted to begin with Donald Trump's response to Russia's testing of both the Poseidon underwater torpedo and the Burevestnik missile. So he had this to say about that. The United States has more nuclear weapons than any other countries. This was accomplished, including a complete update and renovation of existing weapons during my first term. He hated this, he says. Russia has the second number of nuclear weapons, China distant third, but he has instructed the Department of War to begin nuclear tests. Now, Vladimir Putin has awarded the developers of the Burevestnik missile and the underwater Poseidon torpedo. And I just wanted to pull up what he had to say about them, as well as a surprising development he noted during the Burevestnik test. Here we go.
The nuclear-powered, nuclear-capable Burevestnik missile and the Poseidon underwater autonomous vehicle. I'd like to thank all of the design bureaus and collectives. These are tens of thousands of people who participated in the development and creation of these powerful and unique weapons. The results that you have achieved are absolutely historical, and they're important for the strategic parity of our country. In fact, they provide a strategic parity for the whole 21st century.
So after this, he noted, and I'll just pull that up. I have to read this because it is in Russian. He says, but I think foreign specialists were also able to see all of this for themselves, because during the Burevestnik 21 test, there was, he explains, there was a NATO reconnaissance ship constantly present in the area. We didn't interfere with its operations. We let them watch. So how about we start with you, Larry Johnson? Talk about your reaction to these new weapons, the Poseidon underwater nuclear torpedo, the Burevestnik missile. What are your reactions to them, and what is your assessment of Trump's response?
First, it's a complete role reversal from what was what I saw during the Cold War. And what I mean by that is, back in 1980, 81, when I was teaching at American University in the Washington semester program, I took a group of college juniors and seniors down to the then Soviet embassy. And this was all during the time that the United States was deploying a Pershing missile into Europe. And the Soviets were very defensive. I mean, and they basically said, "Yeah, we got that too. Yeah, we're good." It was not one of confidence; it was one of lack of confidence. Now I'm watching Donald Trump act like those Soviet officials back in 1981. That we got more than you. He's turned a measuring contest, and not dealing with the fact that Russia has now deployed what is literally a game changer. Having a nuclear reactor as the power plant on board one of these missiles now completely, it even changes how you do nuclear arms control agreements. Because in the past, we would have, okay, we got an agreement for those intercontinental ballistic missiles, because they can go 5,000 miles or more. And then we got an agreement for those intermediate range nuclear missiles, because they can only go up to 2,000 miles. And then we got the short range, Well, this one it's all three. It's short, it's medium, it's long, and frankly, is it eternal? It'll have a finite lifespan, But, and I've seen some comments by some former Pentagon officials, one of whom I know and like, but he was saying, "Oh, this is nothing. This is nothing new. We tried it back in '64, it didn't work. So the Russians obviously have the same crappy system we did." Sorry, wrong. What Russia now has created is a missile that can stay aloft. We don't know how long. I don't want to hear people say, "Oh, it'll be 6 months or a week or a year," or we don't know. We haven't tested it ourselves, and all the Putin said that they did the Chauncey Gardner move, which you remember the movie Being There with Peter Sellers. He was Chauncey Gardner, and he said, "I like to watch." Okay, U.S. got the watch, and we watched it fly around. We don't know for how long. Was it 14 hours, 14 days? But Russia has achieved a significant breakthrough here, which now they don't have to worry about getting their missiles out of the silo quick. In fact, they could pre-deploy these and just send them off, that they're there ready to go, and remind the West that, look, we've already got nuclear weapons up in the air and ready to strike. And you're not going to know where they are, and you're not going to be able to take them out. So let's talk instead of make threats with each other.
Yeah. Well, Colonel Wilkerson, same question to you. Of course, this comes as the New START treaty is set to expire. And as you saw from Trump's reaction to these tests by Russia, there is all of this urgency now to, quote unquote, test U.S. nuclear weapons. What do you make of all this?
First of all, the man doesn't know what he's talking about. That's nothing new about Donald Trump. But this is a very dangerous regime to be ignorant in. Just take his statement about who has the most weapons. Well, what are you talking about, Donald? Are you talking about warheads? Are you talking about delivery vehicles? Are you talking about dual-use vehicles that can be seconded as delivery vehicles? What are you talking about, Donald? You don't know what you're talking about. If you're talking about warheads, the Russians have a few more than we do. So that was a stupid statement to make. We track the destruction of some 30,000 warheads on both sides, roughly 28 on our side and 30,000 on their side. That was the intention anyway, was to go down to almost nothing. We didn't get that far, but we tracked it pretty closely, and I have no doubt that we're still tracking pretty closely what warheads are on each side. And that's my primary measurement is warheads. Delivery vehicles are important. Dual-use vehicles are important. All those things can cause cheating or compliance. But the warheads is the significant thing. And as Larry has pointed out, delivery vehicles become important when they are vastly different, if you will, and offer you a completely new regime of using those warheads, which is apparently what's happening with this new missile. And we don't know how many different classes they might be working on with regard to it. But the one that we have seen and heard about is probably, as Larry says, is dangerous enough. But Donald needs to understand what he's talking about before he starts talking about it, and he doesn't. And as I said, this is an extremely dangerous regime for the chief of a state, the head of the country, if you will, to not know anything about. And he doesn't. It's clear that he doesn't. It's clear that he doesn't understand it. He doesn't know what's going on. Now, at the same time, I have to add that I've been aware for some time, and I can't talk very much about this, of a capability that we have that rivals and surpasses Poseidon. No question in my mind. I've seen it demonstrated. That's all I can say. So I don't even know if Donald knows about that. I hope he doesn't, frankly. It's a very, very, shall we say, code-worded program and very much not for public distribution. And that's about all I can say about that. But I will tell you that he doesn't know what he's talking about, and that's scary. I'll repeat that. It's frightening that a man who talks about the CTBT and doesn't have a clue as to what the CTBT is. One of the reasons we moved into that regime, when I say we, all of us who were doing significant aerial, if you will, airborne in the atmosphere testing, was because when we did the super bomb, the fission fusion bomb, we weren't sure we didn't rip the atmosphere in a way that was not conducive to human life. And that got people thinking deeply that Dr. Teller might have been a little bit wrong with what he was talking about with combining fusion and fission. And maybe we were going to do really irretrievable destruction and maybe even hurt the planet badly. And so we stopped atmospheric testing, and then we stopped underground testing. We stopped all testing. And everyone agreed to it, even though no one ratified the Treaty of Consequence. And the only reason China and others of consequence didn't ratify the treaty is because they were following our lead. We wouldn't ratify the treaty. When Secretary Powell tried to bring the Law of the Sea Treaty, a farce, an absolute farce that we haven't ratified that, shows you how stupid our Senate is. Before the Senate, we wanted to bring the CTBT up too. It didn't get past Dick Cheney's door, showing you how stupid Dick Cheney was, because we couldn't even get him to approve our going over to the Senate and at least trying to get one or both of those treaties ratified. That's how stupid we are today. And Donald Trump is just deepening and making more profound that stupidity.
Yeah, and Larry, I wanted to actually play now. Defense Minister Belousov made comments in a meeting with Vladimir Putin's cabinet. Here is how he is reacting to Donald Trump's threats of nuclear weapons tests.
It's a comprehensive set of activities that may include actual nuclear tests. And this greatly increases the level of nuclear danger for Russia. This means that we must keep our nuclear arsenal ready to deliver unacceptable damage to any opponent, and we must respond to Washington's steps so as to ensure the security of our country. Considering all of the above, I think it is expedient to start preparing for full-scale nuclear tests immediately. Our Novaya Zemlya testing range has all the infrastructure for that.
Larry, your assessment.
Well, this is not good news, because Trump's reckless comments are escalating the danger. The one thing, during my 12 days in Moscow recently, the one thing I did hear about repeatedly from a variety of sources, both military and civilian, as well as people connected politically, is the grave concern about Trump deploying Tomahawk missiles. Not because each missile is necessarily so powerful, but because those missiles are capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. And the Russians do not want to be in the position of having to try to guess whether or not there is a nuclear warhead on board. And again, what Trump didn't understand with respect to the new weapon platforms that Putin announced a week ago is that these are not actual weapons. They're not carrying a nuke automatically. But Trump conflated that with having to immediately test nuclear warheads, which from what I've read, that's at least 3 years away, 36 months off, if they started last week when Trump made the announcement. So this, Russia's not going to back down. They're not going to be bullied. They're not going to be intimidated, but they are going to respond calmly and firmly. But this calmness and firmness hides the fact that this thing could escalate quickly, and get beyond the control of any country.
Yeah, Danny, I would just say that also another place where he's ignorant, or he's just speaking off the top of his head, not listening to anyone who is expert, is we have ways to test our stockpile that don't require underground or atmospheric testing, don't require the actual explosion of a nuclear warhead. And I've been present when we did several in the Pacific, and it's a pretty thorough process. You can do it in two ways, and usually we do it both ways, so that confirm each with the other. One way is called subcritical, where you don't get to the point where it would explode, physically explode. And the other way is computer modeling in computers. And we were perfectly content in the military to watch this process happen in Hawaii and to understand that the stockpile was reasonably sound. I would have given it a 95 to 99%. There's always that 1% or so of certitude that, yeah, you load one of these up and fire it, it's going to go off. You don't have to test.
Yeah, Larry, my question to you is this. Why is Donald Trump acting so stunned about what Russia has accomplished here? Because Russia has not really kept anything, quote unquote, secret. They've conducted these tests and now are talking about them quite publicly. Vladimir Putin also said there's another missile coming on the way, a heavy ICBM called the Sarmat, which will be fully operational next year. Why is Trump acting so stunned? What is the context here for the kind of panic we are seeing coming from him? To me, it doesn't seem to make much sense because everyone in the United States in Washington should know Russia has nukes, and Russia also has a very advanced military-industrial complex currently in partially at war with the United States.
It's either deliberate ignorance or it's a Claude Rains performance. You know, Rains was the actor in the movie Casablanca, the police chief, who was shocked to discover gambling going on in the casino. So, you know, it could be that Trump is feigning shock and outrage. It's something that he actually knows about. And it's his attempt at a negotiating ploy. But I'm inclined to believe it's more on the ignorance front. And I disagree with your premise, Danny, that there are people who know and are keeping the president informed. Well, you know, one of the most striking things I observed in Moscow, and compared it to the States, is across the board here in the United States, the commentators who, former military personnel in particular, the Jack Keynes, David Petraeus, Ben Hodges, Admiral Stavridis, when they go on television and talk about the Russians, they do so within the most insulting, demeaning terms. Russians are terrible, they're incompetent, they're no good, they're they're always talking them down. In other words, underestimating Russia's capabilities. By contrast, what I saw and heard from a variety of generals, both active and retired, you know, Lieutenant General Appy Aludinov in particular, he's still active duty. General Evgeny Buzinsky he's been retired, but he dealt extensively with American and British and NATO generals over the years. The Russians speak of Western military with respect, not insults, not demeaning comments, not dismissive comments. They take Western military capabilities seriously. They don't laugh at them. They don't ridicule them. Now, candidly, I think they've got ample room to ridicule a lot about the West. But I was struck that this was a consistent attitude, mindset that the Russians demonstrated vis-a-vis the West. In contrast, the West completely dismisses Russia. And it's that arrogance, that hubris in the West, where we assume we're the best, you know, like Trump, we're the best, nobody's better than us. And go, hey, Don, how'd we do in Vietnam, man? In fact, more recently, how'd we do with those Houthis? So the reality that the United States hasn't actually won a war against anybody that could be considered near peer since World War II is an indictment of our system. And yet we continue to parade around like we are the best athlete that's ever lived, the most intelligent scientist that's ever worked, and refusing to accept or acknowledge what others like Russia and China have actually accomplished.
Yeah, your thoughts, Colonel Wilkerson.
Well, I agree with Larry. One of the first principles of war is not to underestimate your enemy. And the opposite of that, or the parallel of that, the corollary of that, is not to laugh in his face, not to call him a paper tiger, particularly when he's not a paper tiger. That's dangerous. And I go back to the nuclear realm. In the nuclear realm, it's increasingly dangerous because we have no treaties left. We're not talking. We're not doing any of the things that we learned to do and did so assiduously and frequently and consistently during the Cold War. We talked, we looked, we examined, we verified, we tested, and I don't mean testing nuclear warheads. We looked at things as if the enemy was real, significant, and warranted our looking, warranted our verification, warranted our business with him when it was come time to sign treaties and make sure they were verifiable and as good as they could be. We're doing none of that now. We're acting as if not only are we king of the world, but no one else out there has any antagonism towards us, or if they do, we'll smush them like a bug. That's not the case. It's certainly not the case anymore. As Larry pointed out, we couldn't even smash Al-Ansar, the Houthis. And we've had a hard time smashing others since 9/11 that we set out to smash. We set out to obliterate. We have obliterated no one. We got more terrorists in the world right now than we had on the day before 9/11. Many of them created out of motivation made by us. We are a disaster when it comes to what we call the rules-based order because, one, we're destroying that order, and two, we're putting nothing in its place except bombast, and three, the bombast is just that. There's really not muscle behind it.
Well, also, Larry, isn't that the problem here, though, to what Colonel Wilkerson was saying? This push to obliterate, whether you can or not, eventually leads to this possibility that there will be a country, there will be people around the world who will want to protect themselves from that, leading to these advances that Russia has made. So isn't this part of the root problem that the United States just isn't even engaging in diplomacy, doesn't know how to retreat? What's your...
Well, there's, underlying your question is the assumption that the United States has a strategy. And clearly we do not. And when I'm talking, when you're starting to think strategically, you've got to start asking, certain fundamental questions. What kind of resource base do we have? Are we dependent on anything outside of us? Or, if we had to, not that we'd want to, but if we had to build a wall around ourselves, could we survive and actually live comfortably? The U.S. has not done that kind of thinking at all. We've just assumed, hey, we're the biggest, we're the baddest on the planet. Nobody can match up with us, and therefore we can throw our weight around and tell others what to do. This is one of the other things I came away from Moscow with an understanding of. The Russian approach is the exact opposite of a zero-sum game. The West lives by the zero-sum game. We win, you lose. There's no in between. You submit, you bow the head, get down on your knees, accept your vassal status, do as you're told, do what we tell you to do, and enjoy it. Well, nobody likes living under that kind of ruler, and that inevitably leads to revolt. Whereas the Russian approach is quite different, because they're not seeking to impose their will on other countries. And people say, "Oh, wait a second, what are they doing in Ukraine?" Oh, Ukraine's different because this was provoked by NATO expanding continuously to the east and posing a direct military threat to Russia. But when you look at Russia's dealings, whether it's with China, with India, which are big countries, or even smaller countries like Iran. And you go further into the global south and into Africa, you don't find Russia being in this position of saying basically, you do it my way or you hit the highway. They look for a conciliatory approach. So this lack of strategy on the part of the United States is what's so dangerous, because we've convinced ourselves that we can always kill our way out of a problem, and that by killing and destroying, that we can come out victorious. And it's really, if we look carefully at the history of particularly the last 70 years, it tells a very different story, that all of our violence, all of our killing hasn't made us safer, richer, or more secure.
Yeah, Colonel Wilkerson, your final word on this before moving on.
Yeah, let's just let's do a little map here. You're on a huge, tall tower out in the central Atlantic, and you're standing up there and you're looking at what you can see from there. And what you can see from there is all the way in the Midway, say past the Urals in Russia, down through the Caucasus. You can see what's happening in the world. And what you're looking at is you're seeing almost nothing except commerce and other things related to trade coming from that direction, the direction of China and Russia and other countries in that way, coming this way. You're seeing a deep sea fishing fleet, for example, of China that has over 6,000 ships, many of which are bigger than mainline combatants in the United States Navy, and several of which are armed to the teeth. But they're not killing people, they're fishing. They might be a little predatory in the way they're fishing, but they're fishing. They're doing commerce, they're doing trade. And you're looking down towards Ramstein and you see a constant flow of things coming from the empire, all over the empire. And they're going to Ramstein, and then they're going to the greatest genocide on the face of the earth, even worse than Sudan, equaling some of the things that Hitler did in the 40s. And you're watching another train, not quite as big, but it's going up towards metaphoric train. It's going up towards Murmansk and on into the Arctic Circle and trying to do the same thing up there. And it's all military. There's no trade associated with it. And then you're looking at another one that's funneling weaponry into the heart of Europe for the battle in Ukraine. And I could go on and on and on, and you're not seeing anything coming back the other way towards America. You have to conclude, if you're up on top of that tower with that kind of visibility, that the one behind you to the west, as it were, the American empire, oh, I left out all the weapons and ships flowing down towards Venezuela. You have to conclude that the empire, such as it is insane. And just as Larry said, has no visible, workable, certainly, strategy. It's just doing things to be doing them. And it's doing them in concert with more or less someone in the White House who doesn't seem to really know what he's doing. And if you're on top of that tower, which do you think is the best situation and which the most dangerous? I don't think there's any decision to be made there.
Yeah, well, speaking of this, these fronts of a war that the American empire is currently engaged in, I wanted to get actually into Venezuela with both of you, because this situation is very chaotic, and there is obviously an objective to rid of Maduro, to destabilize, overthrow that government. And there's been some interesting developments in this way. Just before we started speaking, I came across this story in the Telegraph, mind you, but they are citing a Russian lawmaker. It says Russia is open to sending hypersonic missiles to Venezuela, including a weapon capable of carrying nuclear warheads. They're talking about the Oreshnik, but it was Alexei Zuraligov, butchered his name, but the deputy chairman of Russia's Parliamentary Defense Committee said that Americans may be in for some surprises. I see no obstacles supplying a friendly country with new developments such as the Oreshnik, or let's say the proven caliber missiles. And he said this to the Russian media site Gazeta.ru. Larry, let's begin with you. What's your take on the overall situation with Venezuela? Because there's all kinds of ideas floating about on how Donald Trump in his administration is going to essentially go on a more fuller assault on this country. And then you have this element of reports Maduro is asking for Russian and Chinese help. Some believe that none of that is going to come, while there are some in Russia who say it could very well come. What's your assessment of this?
Well, I would put the comments by the Russian member of their legislature aside. He certainly doesn't make policy. He may be on that particular government board, but this is going to be a combined call of the general staff with the foreign ministry decided, okay, what is it that are planning going forward, as well as with the intelligence service in Russia. I watched firsthand back in 1988, 1989, as the United States went about preparing the regime change in Panama. The analyst in charge of in my branch, a woman named Alyssa, she was it was sort of unique because normally the Directorate of Operations kept analysts at arm's length, but she was being brought into the actual planning and the activities of the Directorate of Operations, the Latin American division on the DO, and at the time I don't recall if it was Jerry Gruner or Vince Shields or Jack Devine who were the ones making the calls on the CIA side, but there was a year and a half effort to provoke retaliation by Noriega and his troops. Now, completely different situation, both strategically and tactically for the United States, because we had troops already in Panama. They were based both in and around Panama City, the capital, and up north in the Cologne, around the city of Cologne, where the Cologne Free Trade Zone is. Panama's a very small country compared to Venezuela. You could drive from the East Coast to the West Coast of Panama. If there was no traffic, 2 hours, easy, hour and a half maybe. So right there at the isthmus. Venezuela is almost as large as Alaska. It's a third larger than Texas. So it's a big, big country. And I have said, both intending the irony and satire, is Venezuela is Spanish for Vietnam. It is a mountainous jungle, rainforest. It is very difficult terrain to take and occupy. And how to say this? We haven't learned a damn thing from our air operations over the last 70 years. We keep thinking, hey, if we just drop enough bombs, boy, they'll give up. We've tried it in Iraq twice, didn't work. We tried it in Libya and Somalia and Afghanistan, and go down the list. So even if we do decide to start dropping bombs in Venezuela, it's not going to end what we're calling the threat. It's not going to, even if it kills Maduro, there will be somebody else rise up, and that's where the United States always fails. It fails to take into account the question, what comes next? And without troops on the ground to control the situation on the ground, the United States is going to be severely disadvantaged. So we're provoking a fight that not only we cannot finish, it's what I maintain we cannot win, even though we still convince ourselves we're the biggest, we're the baddest, we're the greatest. So, I watched us do this in Panama, where we had every advantage. And in fact, even after that takeover, it hasn't made Panama the kind of utopian democracy that we thought we were creating. And you've had subsequent presidents who were deeply involved with drug trafficking. We had Noriega as one of our assets from the standpoint of the CIA. So this is a futile effort on the part of the Trump administration, and I think it's all about going after, in particular, the oil and gas resources of Venezuela.
Yeah, and Colonel Wilkerson, there's two questions too. One, is there an underestimation right now of Venezuela? I mean, this is a country that has been sanctioned into the ground or attempted to, yet you still have the leader of Venezuela continuing to win elections. You have reports of like masses of people in Venezuela being armed to fight and protect the country should the U.S. attack. And then you also have, and the other question I had for you is, what stops Russia, even though obviously there are many considerations here, but what stops Russia from providing missiles like the Oreshnik to Venezuela, given that not only is the United States going after, of course, all of Russia's friends, the friendly countries as referenced earlier, but it's also conducting nuclear tests in Ukraine, etc., weapons all around it. I mean, this feels like a new Cold War that, of course, Russia has stood above for so long. But your reaction to all of this?
Well, it would be a tit for tat that one would expect a mirror image or close to a mirror image. I'm not sure you could get a mirror image of Donald Trump if Putin were that person, but Putin's not that person. But I assure you that if it comes down to the point where he feels like it's existential for Russia or near existential, he will try some things like that. But let's just examine what you're saying there. And what Larry said is absolutely true. I think it's about 29,000 square miles for Panama and 355,000 for Venezuela. That's quite a difference. And when you think about the troops we had on the ground ahead of time, hell, we had a command down there at Quarry Heights. It's a completely different situation. Think about Vietnam, too, where you had Laos and Cambodia, which we never, the CIA notwithstanding, it tried. It sold drugs for money and financed its operations. It did everything it could possibly do, and it never subdued the insurgency that was being supported from Laos and Cambodia. Never. Well, think about Colombia and think about the way Trump has recently pissed off Colombia. Think about other countries that might fuel the insurgency that would take place if we even got to that point in Venezuela. It's impossible to think about us going into Venezuela with conventional forces supported by air and so forth and doing anything more than getting ourselves in a quagmire, just like Larry said. So it's disastrous to do that. Now, your question, the pertinent part of your question, I think, is would someone else in the world, someone hard-pressed or at least feeling hard-pressed in other theaters, want to tie the United States up even further than it's already tied up? My first response would be no. Look at Gaza. Look at what we're doing there. We are burying ourselves there. And if we go on as Bibi wishes to Iran in the new convoluted way he's explained it now, that's a whole new business that he's working on now, then we'll get so deeply mired in it that Russia won't have to do anything but watch the empire melt and disappear. So why worry about Venezuela other than to, under the UN auspices, stand up for their rights as an independent country? By the way, this isn't the first leader that we've been angry with. This is one of the few South American countries that's managed to get two in a row, Hugo Chavez and now Nicholas Maduro. You know, they're leaders we don't like. They're leaders that we can't deal with. They're leaders we despise. They're leaders we want to get rid of. But why do we want to do that? Well, Larry just told you why, in essence, because they're opposed to what we want to do to their countries, which is rape, pillage, and plunder them. And we will always find people like this Peace Prize winner who will say that they're on our side and come on television and say, I should give this Peace Prize to Donald Trump. Right there, you know, she's an idiot.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, Larry, this feels like there are a couple elements too here where the United States is now moving to what it sees as lower hanging fruit. There's been a disaster in China. Russia is leading, is like moving toward a nuclear disaster, but one essentially that the U.S. cannot handle in a confrontation. And then, of course, you have the Marco Rubio element. There's a lot of these elements too regarding maybe not a strategy, but a continuous reaction of trying to choke off this larger shift in the world, because Venezuela is an all-weather partnership with China. Maduro has been talking very highly about the partnership with Russia. So how much of this also has to do with trying to choke off this new world that's being born?
That goes to the heart of it, because the international financial and political order that was put in place at the end of World War II, and it didn't come into being overnight. I mean, if you will, the regimen with the International Monetary Fund, World Bank, the whole Bretton Woods system took about 3 years to actually get up and running. The United Nations, which creates a Security Council where essentially Western Europe and the United States can block anything, and the countries that are actually now dynamic centers for both economic growth and political influence are shut out. India in particular, Brazil to a lesser extent. Whenever you get a change from one system to another like that, it doesn't come about peacefully. It's generally violent. Now, Russia, China, India, Brazil, South Africa, they are trying to manage a peaceful, non-conflictual transformation. But the United States is not letting go. We keep insisting, as you've heard Donald Trump about, we're the biggest, the best, the strongest, etc. And it's just not true. The West exists largely on what are described as financialized economies that are based upon, selling and buying dollars, currencies, services, not based upon what they actually make, what they can actually produce, but rather it's this thing that exists really only on paper and in people's minds. And yeah, there are actual real dollars attached to it, but it's not. These are not lasting structures, physical things that you can put your hands on. And we're in a process now, and I think Maduro wisely recognizes it, as does Cuba, that there is now an exit from the sanctions environment that the U.S. has sought to impose upon any country that didn't line up to, as Donald Trump said, kiss his ass. Iran in particular is now much better off than it was a year ago. A year ago, you still, in principle, had China and Russia still willing to back up UN sanctions if Iran stepped out of line. Not anymore. They've both declared the UN sanctions null and void, which means there's now economic commerce taking place between and among Russia, China, and Iran in a way that has not happened before, which I think you'll see will lead to an easing of some of the economic pain and suffering that Iran has gone through.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to. Sorry, Colonel Wilkerson, you were muted.
I just wanted to add that the thing everyone was talking about, from Treaty of Parsi to you name it, snapback sanctions have had almost no impact whatsoever.
Yeah.
Because of what Larry was just saying, and also because of Europeans' fear of what Larry was just saying.
Yeah, and I can get your reaction to this too, Colonel Wilkerson, both of you. I think another effect of this has been that there has been a stronger and stronger response. We noted the missile tests from Russia, but you had Sergei Lavrov not too long ago say this about Iran. Might be a little quiet, the question.
Got independent journalist. Two questions. First on Iran and Palestine. Second question on Iran.
Did Russia supply S-400 to Iran, and what of the deal with the Sukhoi aircraft? Have they arrived to Iran? In regards to our military and technical cooperation with Iran, we have no limits in regards to our military technical cooperation since the restrictions have expired, and we are currently engaged in the supply of those equipment that is required.
So, this is also a kind of approach that I feel like maybe Colonel Wilkerson and then Larry, if you wanted to respond, approach that maybe we wouldn't have seen prior to even 2022.
No, I think not. And let me just add to the broader picture here. If you think about what we were just talking about, and you think about the last empire upon whom the sun never set, that disappeared in really a remarkably short period of time, roughly 1890 to about 1956. That's not a real long time for an empire to just completely melt. What happened there was Germany rose up to the point, and others were in a similar strait, Russia in particular, in terms of population growth, which was just off the charts, to threaten that empire. And so they generated World War I. Well, that didn't turn out too well, and it certainly didn't save their empire, and it created a beast in the heart of Europe. That beast then, 19, 20 years later, raised up and finished off the British Empire. Effectively finished it off. It took till 1956 before they really realized it in London, and then turned themselves over to being the vassal state in the special relationship and lived off the American empire. But it went fairly rapidly. That's precisely the kind of chemistry that's in the world today, except we're Britain.
Sorry, Larry, your reaction. I was muted.
Yeah, it's reminiscent of that movie role that that was played, with Haley Joel Osment was the child actor. Bruce Willis was the adult actor, and most of the movie was about he was asked to investigate. He thought he was looking for trying to figure out why this kid was seeing ghosts. It took him the whole movie to realize he was a ghost. He was dead. He didn't realize he was dead. It took him 2 hours. Now, so here's Britain. We're now 70 years past their failed attempt to take over the Suez Canal, and it's 70 years that they don't realize they're dead. They still walk around pretending like they're this, vibrant, virile empire, and but when you step back and look at it, they couldn't even get their aircraft carrier out of harbor, and then the couple of ships that they did get out of harbor ran into each other in the Persian Gulf. I mean, it's like a Keystone Cop episode. So the Britannia, who once ruled the seas, they're having trouble getting out of this port. So we're in a very strange time because NATO has such an inflated view of itself, and they're not stepping back and taking any kind of honest reflection. And I did a piece a couple of days ago where I looked at when it comes to building main battle tanks, modern battle tanks that aren't just refurbishing hulls of like M1 Abrams that are 50 years old. All of NATO with the United States have produced zero in 2024. Zero. Russia's produced between 60 and 80, and I think it's closer to 80. Now, Poland was the one exception. They get to count 56 tanks that they bought from South Korea. But last I checked, South Korea is not really part of NATO, okay? On the artillery front, artillery shells, Russia does 152 millimeter, U.S. and NATO do 155. And Russia enjoys a 3 to 4 to 1 advantage over NATO. Drones, same thing, 2 to 1, 3 to 1 advantage with respect to drones. Hypersonic missiles, Russia's got at least 5 variants. The West, None. So, I mean, we keep going on and on. Turn the question around. Can you name one weapon system where NATO has an advantage over Russia? And the answer is no, there is not a single one. And then when it comes to actually trained manpower that are hardened through combat and now know how to fight the modern war, again, Russia's got the advantage. So, NATO looking in the mirror like the evil queen and Snow White and, mirror, mirror on the wall. Who's the most military badass of all? Oh, you are United States. You are Donald Trump. The mirror's lying. It's lying. The world has changed in such a fundamental way in the last 3 years that Russia and China combined now present a massive industrial capability for fighting a modern war if necessary, because they've got the resources and the industrial plant to make it happen. Whereas the West, we're good at pronouns.
Yeah, and oh, sorry, Colonel Wilkerson.
I had a woman ask me the other day, once we talked about something like what Larry and I were just talking about. She said, well, who are we going to cling? Whose skirts are we? She said, whose skirts are we going to cling to when we go down? There ain't no America out there.
Yeah.
Colonel Wilkerson, I know you have about 5 more minutes with us, so I wanted to ask you perhaps your broader assessment of where you feel like things are right now, because when I look at the situation with Venezuela, despite everything that's said about it, despite Western mainstream media reports, what Washington says, the Rubios of the world, this is a country that probably should have fallen. Their government should have fallen years ago. Starvation sanctions have not accomplished this. The opposition, you mentioned Machado earlier, she's not popular inside of Venezuela. From recent reports, actually, she represents a faction that's the least popular in Venezuela, and I don't know if there's a real secret as to why that is, given that she asks for the United States to bomb the country. So, to me, it seems like we're at a period where the United States has a lot of bluster, a lot of threats, and likes to kind of swing around its military, but I don't see the outcome occurring that obviously is being pursued, which is the end of that government. Your thoughts?
Well, as I said, they've gone through 2 now, or not gone through the second one yet, but they've gone through essentially 2 regimes of people we didn't like at all, that we detested. And I think it's fair to say that we were trying to overthrow Hugo Chavez too, probably with a little bit more skill than we're trying with Maduro right now, although it didn't succeed. And we just don't like that. We do not like the South Americans and the Latin Americans in general forming governments that are fundamentally for their people. Now, think about the contradiction that is of the so-called rules-based order that we claim to have set up and be enforcing. We're doing no such thing. Not only were we hypocrites all along in many respects, not always, but in many respects, we are also now destroying every fabric of that which we were hypocrites in implementing in the first place. So there is no blanket left over our perfidy, over our crimes. They are revealed to the world. And the world finds them, particularly through the lens of Gaza and what's happening elsewhere in the Levant, appalling, despicable, and not to be tolerated. And when that happens with a behemoth in the world, the behemoth's days are numbered. And we only have to sit back and wonder just how many days are left. It could be quite a while, because, as Ricardo Alarcon told me one thing, even a dying elephant can thrash a lot of grass. The problem with thrashing a lot of grass is that we do not have any nuclear treaties. We're showing no willingness to forge some and maybe protect our existence for a while. And that could be the end product that we go down with nukes. And that scares me. That scares me to death, because that means real danger to not just the empire, but to the rest of the world too.
Yeah, and perhaps even in a kind of faster, more rapid cascading effect than what we saw in the Cuban Missile Crisis. The communication, the relationship, even then, between the Soviet Union and the United States was far better than it is now.
And I keep saying to all my friends who say, "Well, this business about the power shifting and all that, so what? It'll take 100 years or whatever." I say, well, the difference in history, at least I think I'm right here, in 5,000 years of hundreds and hundreds of empires, is no empire has ever had the technological means to destroy itself in the world. This is a first. This is the first.
Yeah. Well, Colonel Wilkerson, I know that you have to step away. We have one more segment here to go with Larry Johnson. So, Colonel Wilkerson, great to be with you. See you again soon.
Take care.
See you, my friend.
You
Bye-bye.
too. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right. All right. So, Larry, we have actually one question from the audience. How about we get to that first?
No, I don't. I don't do those. Oh,
No,
okay.
no.
Okay.
Let's get to this first, because I think it runs.
I'm a self-important prima donna. You know.
Yeah, I mean,
Speak to the peasants. Are you kidding?
you have. It's not like you don't do that every day.
Go ahead.
All right. So, no, I mean, totally understandable. You have every right to stick your head up. Okay. So, what are your opinions as Peaceful Earth of the nuclear tsunami weapon, the Poseidon, that Russia has? And North Korea said they tested last December, which I am actually not familiar with. So I'm wondering if you are, Larry. Does the sudden rise of North Korean technology affect things? So maybe you can talk about that in the context of Russia's Poseidon too, the details.
Yeah, I think, from a tactical standpoint, flooding out coastal cities involves killing civilians. So let's look at the history of both the Russians and the West with respect to killing civilians. During the Second World War, the Great Patriotic War, it was the United States and the United Kingdom that routinely bombed civilian areas in Europe and in Asia and killed, probably combined, well over 2 million civilians. The Russians did not. The Russians consistently, even under the Soviets, and people are, well, Stalin executed. Okay, let's just talk about war. Dealing. I'm not excusing Stalin's actions during the whole effort to gain control of the country, but when it came to carrying out war, both the Soviets and the Russians have rejected attacking and killing civilians. They've been very consistent in that. And I think one of the real, especially now, guiding forces in that is the Russian, the predominance of Orthodox Christianity at the heart of what Russian society is. So I could see these weapons being used. I think the bigger effect would be on carrier task force groups that could be used against to basically eliminate the U.S., French, and British navies, what's left of them. So I think the tsunami on the cities is sort of a Hollywood director's erotic dream, but it's not. I don't see it as a feasible military tactic.
Right. And just the fact that it has the capabilities of doing such a thing, I think, is what has maybe shocked people. I think a lot we've seen over the last several years, Russia's military advances continue to open eyes, especially in the United States, given how people in the United States have been told, as we've talked about on this show, that the U.S. is the military superpower, that the U.S.'s military is just unmatched and without any competitor. But now a country that, as you said, Larry, is dedicated to defending itself and is dedicated to using its military for means that are not about mass murdering civilians. That is also, I think, coming to a surprise to many.
Yeah, the other I think is just how agile and quick Russia has been to change tactics, adopt new tactics, and develop new technologies. 3.5 years ago, we were hardly talking about drones at all. And especially weren't talking about drones as an offensive weapon. Now, drones have essentially taken over the battlefield and are actually erasing the traditional concepts of front lines and maneuver warfare. In the past, when you were basically having to deal with the firepower that an enemy had on the ground, with artillery, with tanks, with gun emplacements, supplemented by some close air support, which means a fixed wing aircraft flying in, dropping bombs. It was a matter of trying to hide the buildup of forces, creating a massive number so that you could punch through a line, encircle, surround, and take territory that way. Well, that's no longer viable, because if you start assembling any large group of soldiers anywhere close to the front, they're vulnerable. Russia just, 4 days ago, there was a group of Ukrainians assembled for some award ceremony, and they got hit with 2 Iskander missiles and killed a majority of them. So the drones have completely changed that playbook. And in the course of that, as Russia first deployed drones, particularly that came out of Iran, that were modeled after a CIA drone, the Garan and the Shahid. Then they began encountering problems with electronic warfare as Ukraine, with Western assistance, developed systems to prevent the drone from operating. The Russians quickly developed fiber optic drones, and those fiber optic drones were unaffected by the electronic warfare. Now, it had more of a limited range, but again, they keep figuring out to become more creative and getting bigger spools of fiber optic wire that can allow these drones to go, tens, if not dozens of miles. So what we've seen with Russia is incredible flexibility, adaptability, in a way that is so much faster than what the West can do, what the West has done, and defies the assumptions of the West about Russian military capabilities.
Yeah, maybe we can factor in now the situation in Ukraine, because it is going disastrously. I don't know if you caught Larry Zelensky supposedly going to Pokrovsk, talking about how the line is now being refortified, how Russia is absolutely not in control. The surrounding of Pokrovsk is being addressed and taken care of by the Ukrainian military.
Wait a second. You mean Baghdad Bob, don't you? Wasn't that Baghdad Bob? No,
It looked like
Okay.
it there, but this is what was said in the in NBC News, though. I mean, even the mainstream media is saying that Russia is now urging Ukrainian troops to leave because they are being squeezed, despite the fact that no encirclement of our units and formations is happening, according to the Ukraine side. But even NBC had to say that there was a very difficult situation here, according to a Ukrainian unit operating in Pokrovsk, and it says it's only been getting worse. So where does this factor in, Larry, the battlefield situation? Because we have now Russia in command in Ukraine, it seems, and we also have Russia almost in command of this arms race, if we want to call it, which leaves the Cold War hawks in Washington and Europe in a bit of a bind.
Yeah. When I see statements like that and hear statements, Zelensky statements, it's just the way my brain works. It starts firing off all of these comedy movies. Police Story with Leslie Nielsen as Detective Frank Drebin, and at the one iconic scene in that movie where the bad guy is getting away and he's driving a car and he he hits like a nuclear missile, and then he hits a fireworks display, and so flames are erupting, missiles shooting off right and left, big explosions. And Leslie Nielsen, aka Frank Drebin, walks in front and is standing there saying, "Nothing to see here, folks. Move along. Nothing to see here." That's what Zelensky and company are doing. The Russians have now they're achieving a level of offensive operations that we have not seen in the last 3 years. In 2022, their one big offensive operation, successful, was against Mariupol. They took the city down in the south part of the Donbass. Then in 2023, it was Bakhmut. Again, that went on for 6-8 months, but the Russians finally prevailed. 2024, Avdiivka. Again, a hard-fought, bloody battle. Russians prevailed. Well, this year, you got Russia moving in 6 or 7 battles comparable to the 3 that they did in the previous 3 years. Only now they're doing it all at once. And Ukraine they don't have the manpower resources to sustain defensive operations. And one of these days it's going to crumble. And when it crumbles, it'll crumble all along the front. And then Russia will move pretty quickly to the Dnieper River, and the war will enter a new phase. Because once Russia's at the Dnieper River, it's going to allow these new former oblasts of Ukraine to vote. Do you want to be part of Russia or not? They'll do the same kind of plebiscite that they did with Kherson and Zaporizhia, Donetsk and Luhansk in September of 2022. And I'd place a lot of money on the fact that Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkiv, Sumy, Poltava, at a minimum, will vote to become part of Russia. And so now all of a sudden, Russia, the number of former Ukrainian states that are part of the Federal Republic of Russia will have doubled. That's what Ukraine's current approach is going to produce, a doubling of the size of Russian assets in the former Ukrainian territory.
Yeah. I mean, all signs point to, Larry, that the Ukraine conflict is going to end in Russian victory, but all signs also point to, I guess, the U.S. NATO access not giving up. I mean, there have been some indication that Trump may want to, at least in terms of public face, wash his hands of the conflict, but you still have NATO even maybe planning the next target, almost in a suicidal manner. NATO has been conducting exercises that have been practicing a Kaliningrad blockade. And of course, we heard from a U.S. general talking about Kaliningrad maybe going up in smoke in a NATO attack if Russia should provoke that, quote unquote. But Russia is saying, Deputy Foreign Minister Alexander Grushko says they are going to defend the enclave, obviously, quote, with all available means. So what do you make of this? Is NATO, the U.S., despite their incredible limitations right now, planning for a potentially even more disastrous provocation against Russia via Kaliningrad or elsewhere?
I can't rule it out, at least that there are some in NATO that are thinking seriously about that. But you get down to, okay, it's one thing to talk about it. Now do it. You can sit in your Barca lounger and fantasize about climbing up 100-foot wall, one of those climbing walls that's actually inverted in, so you're going with gravity trying to pull you down. You can fantasize about that all you want, but unless you've actually got the hand strength, the arm strength, and the endurance, you're not going to pull that off. You just can't do it. and how do they blockade Kaliningrad? Kaliningrad already is landlocked, but if they try to shut down the rail and road access that is promised under prior treaties, then Russia will be compelled to use force to open those routes. If the West, NATO in particular, decides to use a naval blockade, then Russia's got this thing called hypersonic missiles that they will take those out in a heartbeat. There won't be a single NATO ship left standing. And then, that escalates to the point that NATO's got to make a decision. Is it going to use nuclear weapons? And Russia will be quite prepared for that. So the Oreshnik cruise missile will be uploaded with a nuclear warhead flying over every capital in Europe. So this can get out of control quickly. I think, and this is speculative on my part, but prior to a week ago, you had, prior to Putin's announcement about the Oreshnik missile, Donald Trump was saying, possibly we're going to deploy Tomahawks. He wasn't dismissing it or ruling it out. He's leaving it on the table. After that conversation with Putin, it's off the table. Right. So no, we're not doing it. Well, what happened? I suspect the discussion with Putin went somewhere along these lines, with Putin's very calmly saying, "Hey, Don, listen, appreciate our discussion. I just need to let you know where we stand. That because the Tomahawk could potentially be carrying a nuclear warhead, and I know you're not intending to do that, but I'm not sure that we can trust everybody in your military. So because it has that potential, we're going to have to treat that, if it's deployed, as you attacking us with nuclear weapons. And if that happens, we're not going to limit our retaliation to just Europe. Continental United States will also be involved. I'd prefer that we avoid this, but just letting you know that's our position. With not confronting Trump, not calling him names, not getting his thin skin bloodied.
Very thin, yes, yeah.
But presenting it in that way, and I think that kind of conversation happened, and I think Trump was saying, "Yeah, I hear you, Vladimir. I hear you. Yeah, well, that's probably not a good idea for us." And that's why he subsequently, when asked, no Tomahawks for Ukraine. So,
do you find that the tests of the Oreshnik and the Poseidon underwater torpedo, that those tests were almost like the icing on top of that message, that it was, yes, we will respond in the way that you said, Larry, and look at what we have now. I mean, Vladimir Putin said straight up that there was a reconnaissance sub that underwater that was spying on them, and it didn't matter. They were like, well, go ahead, take the information. This is not necessarily a secret. We're telling the Russian people anyway.
Right.
Do you think that was the ultimate aim of those tests at the timing? Because it was almost directly after Donald Trump said, no Tomahawks anymore. It was almost as if like to solidify that, no Tomahawks, and look at what we have to make sure that happens.
Yeah, well, it is a game changer, to be sure. And I know I like Stephen Bryan a lot, and Steve is a very smart guy. But he wrote a piece basically poo-pooing the Oreshnik as any kind of significant advance, and I just disagree with him emphatically. What this does, if you go back and look at how we negotiated previous arms control agreements, START would deal with intercontinental ballistic missiles, and before that it was called SALT, I guess. Strategic arm limitation talks. And then we had intermediate range ballistic missile talks. the INF Treaty. Well, this Oreshnik can be all. It can be intermediate. It can be intercontinental. In fact, we really don't know. Maybe there are folks inside CIA or NSA that have finally broken the code on this that can come out and definitively say that how far, how long this missile can stay aloft. But with a nuclear reactor on board, it strikes me that the potential could be not just weeks, but months or maybe even a year or two, which is pretty astonishing. It's that kind of technological advance, which means it's both intercontinental, it's intermediate range, it's short range, it is everything. You know, it's like the old beer commercial. Tastes great, less filling. Tastes great, less. You know, it's both. It can stay aloft for an interminable amount of time, and it can carry a nuclear warhead and is virtually undetectable.
So that means any military target that the U.S./NATO has at its disposal could be hit. Correct?
Yes, absolutely. And Russia can launch it preemptively. And when they launch it preemptively, there's no way that the satellites that normally detect, satellites that are set up to detect the launch of an intercontinental ballistic missile, they won't pick this up. This will be like an airplane taking off. And you won't know that it is necessarily that particular airplane or that particular cruise missile. So yeah, this is a remarkable advance. And Russia keeps, they keep plodding on, moving forward. The same thing on the peaceful front. And let's point out that the Oreshnik missile has the potential to revolutionize space travel. Because now they've got a viable nuclear reactor that can be fit inside a spacecraft and power it for, again, I don't know how long it runs. But the Russians apparently have solved the technical problems of radiation leakage and keeping the core cool. But in the last 6 months, the Russians have also deployed 2 new commercial jetliners. Remember when the sanctions were imposed 3.5 years ago, Russia was essentially cut off from access to Boeing. And the Russians, they didn't panic. They didn't, get mad and throw a fit. They just said, you know what? It's probably time we build our own. And they did. The engine, all the components on board this plane are made in Russia. And now the U.S. has just sort of cut off its nose to spite its face, because sales that used to take place to Russia, to China, they're going to lose those sales out to it. Russia is going to sell to itself and to its Chinese and Indians. India has also put in some orders. You'll see South Africa come along. Brazil, not so much. They've got the Embraer industry, but they may actually buy some of the commercial jetliners that are bigger. They'll have clients in Africa. So Russians have now, as they say, they took the lemons and made lemonade.
Yeah, and this seems to be a global trend. Iran often touts its indigenous capabilities. China, of course, is touting its own indigenous capabilities. So this huge naval aircraft carrier, the biggest in the world, I believe, it just came out. I mean, this seems to be the trend, and it's a direct response to this just hyper militarization that the United States and NATO have been pursuing over the years. Right. Maybe we can close on your thoughts on this, because this it seems like the U.S. now is confronting a situation where it can't go into a military conflict with a Russia, with a China, without devastating consequences. And as Colonel Wilkerson always likes to remind, huge likelihood of a nuclear war. And at the same time, it's this continued endless war regime that fuels more and more countries pursuing its own indigenous capabilities to defend what they are trying to build.
Right. Yeah. No, look, Trump has done so much damage to himself. I will admit, foolishly perhaps, that I was willing to give Trump the benefit of the doubt at the outset that he was really going to be a president about making peace, putting American interests first, and in doing so, opening up dialogue with Russia, with China. He's only done part of that. He has opened up the dialogue with Russia and China, though he doesn't listen a lot of times to what either country is saying. He goes in sort of with pre-scripted answers and comes away saying, "Yeah, boy, there was a movie about the lead up to the invasion of D-Day, the D-Day operation, and Tom Selleck played General Dwight David Eisenhower, and the character that played George Patton, he goes in with all this bravado, gets in with and Eisenhower is getting ready to say, "Hey, we're going to can you, you're going to be tossed," and the George Patton character gets down on his knees and begs and is crying, "No, no, please." Then when he walks out, goes down to his chauffeurs, "I had him eaten out of my hand." That's Donald Trump. Donald Trump in the public persona, when he's not having to sit there and deal with Putin or Xi at his side, talks tough, man. He's the biggest badass on the planet. But the reality is, when he's with those guys in private, he's weak. And he's definitely trying to figure out a way to make them like him. So it is unfortunate that Trump has been roped into pushing wars and putting American interests on the back burner, pandering to the interests of the Zionists, number one, which has threatened to embroil the United States in wars in Iran again, as well as possibility of a war with Venezuela, one that the United States cannot afford to fight. And frankly, I don't think we can win. So it is a dangerous time, and Trump time is running out on his administration. The election results yesterday could be seen largely as a repudiation of Trump's policies, and the Republicans don't have much to take a victory lap about today.
Yeah, I mean, in many respects, how I see things going right now, especially on the foreign policy front. I mean, the economic situation in the United States is a disaster. And of course, now Donald Trump has a lot of stake in that and blame for that. But on top of that, you have a foreign policy disaster after disaster after disaster: Gaza, Ukraine, Iran, and now, of course, this escalating potential quagmire with Venezuela, which if there's anything that might unite Venezuela and the rest of Latin America against U.S. interests, because Latin America's politics right now are heavily divided. We're seeing it all over the continent of South America. It would be a U.S. war that would unite people across all of that progress in trying to get people like Maduro and Lula out of power in the rest of Latin America. That likely would go up in smoke, or it has a huge potential to. Yeah,
I saw that firsthand when I lived in Argentina. We lived with an Argentine family, lived with us. Both of us were involved with construction projects, so we helped the other out. And so, 9 months into the relationship, one morning, their names were Ana and Beto. They came out of the bedroom and announced that they were getting divorced. And I stupidly said, "Well, I'm sorry to hear that. I wish that wasn't happening. But Ana, you are a very difficult woman to live with." They both got mad at me, and they stayed married for 2 more years. Now, they ultimately got divorced. But the point of the story is when an outsider intervenes in something like this, it's going to have consequences that you didn't anticipate. And you know what? It's best just to keep your mouth shut, mind your own business, and stay out of it. But I don't think Donald Trump's going to heed that kind of advice.
Yeah. Yeah, if the GOP, MAGA, whatever, this trend is portraying itself as, if it wants to hand its congressional seats to Democrats without Democrats really having to do anything, which is what's happening, actually. A lot of Democrats just aren't doing anything for about anything. But if they want to hand it to them in the midterm elections, certainly a war in Venezuela, that would be an absolute PR and possibly even broader disaster, would be the thing to do, given the inflation, the economic situation, and all the other issues plaguing the U.S. Larry, this was great. I want to make sure that everybody, let me just pull it up real quick and put it in the video description of this video. Everyone should follow Larry at Sonar21. You can find that in the video description now. Hit that like button before you go, because that helps boost the stream after we are done here. Of course, thanking Colonel Wilkerson as well, who was here earlier. Everyone thank Larry as well for their generous time. Thanks to the super chat that I brought up to Peaceful Earth and the new member here. Really appreciate that. In the video description is all the places also to support this work. Patreon, Substack, and much more. Without further ado, I want to shout out actually DDGeopolitics. They do a lot to support this channel in terms of cooperating on the Telegram side of things. So be sure, actually, in the video description, you can find their YouTube channel. They're going live in about a half hour's time from after this ends. So be sure to check them out. Without further ado, everybody hit that like button before you go, as I said again. And I will be back tomorrow with Pepe Escobar at 10 a.m. Eastern, very early. So be there. Take care.